Gary Patterson is still helping Dave Aranda build a defense that is going to beat TCU once again, because this ain't basketball. Let's get locked on Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello there, Bears fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, the evening edition, brought to you by FanDuel and part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and the Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. Appreciate you making it your first listen today and every day. On the show today, we're going to go over some Gary Patterson quotes. First off, something interesting. It sounds like he's still helping out Baylor, and the high praise that he has for Baylor's new cornerbacks coach, Paul Gonzalez, which obviously spent a long time under Patterson at TCU. And then looking at basketball and things, we're going to jump ahead a little bit to Utah on Saturday, because Utah had a very impressive win over the weekend, which might make Baylor fans even a little more worried about that weekend trip out to the Great Salt Lake. All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Baylor. Starting with the football offseason. Football is the sport that Baylor can beat TCU in all of a sudden, not basketball. But looking at the retooling of this defense, it's something we're going to go a little bit more in depth about later on this week. But I think we've all been, kind of happy about the position coaches, as happy as you can be about position coach hirings, specifically at cornerbacks, where you pull Paul Gonzalez from TCU, 13 years at TCU, obviously, 10 of those under Gary Patterson, followed Gary from UC Davis. So they go way back. They go way, way back. And like the accomplishments that Gonzalez had with that defensive backfield at TCU is pretty incredible. I mean, right? He has a Thorpe winner there. 6 of 7. It's a string of 6 of 7 guys, basically, and 6 guys in a 7-year span get drafted in the NFL from safety. He gets them to the national championship game in 2022. Like, it's a really impressive kind of run that Gonzalez had, both with Gary Patterson and with Sonny Dykes at TCU. And I said it on the show last week when he got hired that it doesn't feel like a coincidence. This was a guy in Gary who is a consultant with the team last year with Baylor, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. And from what we heard of him talking about certain players, specifically on the Matt Mosley show, he was talking about defensive backs. So add that a step further. He's not just talking about the defense, but he's talking about the defensive backfield, which does not have a glowing year for Baylor. But lo and behold, 11 months after he's hired as a consultant, and 7 months after he leaves as a consultant, one of his longtime defensive back guys, his definite longtime defensive back guy, is now the cornerbacks coach at Baylor. And so Gary went on the Matt Mosley show at Friday evening, and talked about what it was like having Paul Gonzalez on his staff, and kind of what the recommendation was to Dave Aranda. And I think Gary hints at some interesting Easter eggs in here as well. Let's hear it.
I think he was at TCU 13 years. If I ever went back to, I could sum this up. If I went back and this is because Chad Glasgow is now building houses and loves it because he's around his kids because he's got time to do it. But Paul would be probably the first choice I would have to be my defensive coordinator if I ever went back as a head coach. That's how much I think of him. He's very knowledgeable, also very progressive. He gets along with the kids well, but he's demanding. If you look at the players he's had through that have playing at a very high level at the NFL level, but he cares about kids, family guy, you name it. He's all of it. And, when Dave called me about him, I said, yeah, it's, like I told him when I first went, if I ever, a year ago spring, if ever had a chance, he would be the guy that I would hire as my coordinator. And so, and I know a lot of defensive guys. And so, but, I think he brings us into the new era of how you coach in college football and you do things. And so with the kind of touch that he has, I just think it's he's got a great future in front of him.
That is just adding to the Baylor W of that hire of Paul Gonzalez. Like, it was honestly, Paul Gonzalez could have done nothing in his career, and Baylor fans are going to see it as a W to take it away from TCU staff. But A, he has done something, and B, you get a ton of praise there from TCU's greatest ever coach, the guy who's with him for 10 plus years, right? I mean, based off that, Paul Gonzalez could have been a defensive coordinator in this conference this year. Because remember, Gary was in the running for that Houston job when they went with Willie Fritz. Like, Gary was in that running. He was actually a hot candidate in that. He said that on the radio a couple of times. And so if that were the case, we would have been talking about Paul Gonzalez as his DC for Houston in the Big 12 this year, 2024 even. So it's in that way, it's like a huge steal for Baylor. I'll take you back. A personal anecdote. When I was playing town league basketball, no big deal. This was 6th grade. I was not very good, but I fancied myself as okay. And I had a really bad tryout. And so my dad, to encourage me, was like, hey, that's actually a good thing. Someone's going to get a steal, right? They're going to pick you. If you're a 5th round pick, they're going to pick you in the 9th round of Rockland Town League basketball, right? But that's kind of what this is here. You're essentially getting the defensive coordinator for the price of a defensive backs coach. With all the experience put in there, you're getting a coordinator at a position coach rate. Perfect. And something else that Gary had talked about in there was he said he mentioned Paul last year when he was with the team. And that's interesting because Dave had just demoted Matt Powledge as the defensive coordinator, took the play calling duties away from him, gave it to himself. And they weren't hiring defensive backs yet, but they were looking at linebackers and got Jamar Chaney. And so I'm interested to see if Dave was trying to work Gonzalez into that staff last year. And the other thing that kind of struck me from that was Gary liberally using the term we in there, or us. He says he'll bring us into that new level of college football or whatever, that new era of college football coaching. He said us, referring to Baylor, by the way. So nice, interesting, I guess, shot at the TCU people there because he's helped out Baylor more recently than he's helped out TCU. In fact, he's helping Baylor raid TCU to help their cause. And so I was already big on this hire, but when you bring in a guy like Gary Patterson, who I guess I'm not like a lot of Baylor fans, I respect the hell out of Gary Patterson and always have. Didn't always like him, but always respected him as a football coach, and his resume speaks for itself. And especially as a defensive guy and a defensive backs guy, he comes in here and says, yeah, that's the guy I would have picked for my defensive coordinator. Full stop. First call, Paul Gonzalez. And Baylor's getting him as a cornerbacks coach and passing game coordinator. So to me, that's a big time W. And it is something to look out for if Baylor Baylor has a defensive coordinator opening next year. Because if they have a terrific year, which we're all hoping and kind of expecting they will, Matt Powledge is going to get some calls. You know, he got some interviews this year, notably at his alma mater, Sam Houston. So even without the play calling duties, I think he will get some shine, even if they have a good year. And maybe it's just leaving for another DC job where he does get to call the plays. If that's the case, Paul Gonzalez, defensive coordinator, handpicked by Gary Patterson, who's still helping the Bears. Gotta love that. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Does this make the hire even better for you? Let me know. Be sure to like the video if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or listen to us wherever you get your podcast. That helps me out a ton. Anyway, Locked On Baylor rolls on. We're looking at a basketball opponent who had a pretty impressive win over the weekend, and why that might scare the Bears a little bit. That's coming up next on Locked On Baylor. But first, this message is brought to you by Prizepicks, okay? That's the place where I go for real daily fantasy sports, real money, okay? It's the place to get real money sports action. There you go. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prizepicks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or the regular season, Prizepicks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. And now it is playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prizepicks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players, and if your pick hits, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Yes, that's right, 1,000 times your cash, just by making a few simple picks. Okay, I went less on Travis Kelce this weekend. It was a bad move. Bad move. Next time, I'm going to go more. Ready to run your game this football postseason? Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 off instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prizepicks. Prizepicks, run your game. Running it back on Locked On Baylor. I'm your host, Cam Stewart, ESPN Central Texas, and the Cam Show. We're going to talk a little bit of hoops here. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself because Baylor's next game is against Kansas State and Jerome Tang and that homecoming, a bogey team for Baylor. I don't think they've beaten Jerome Tang since he's taken over at Kansas State, which is kind of wild considering the ups and downs of his tenure there. He's 3-0 against Baylor. So that's Wednesday's game. We will talk about that, and there's all kinds of intrigue with him coming back and him on the hot seat and whether Kansas State can afford that. We're going to talk all about that this week. But I do want to take a moment to look at Utah, which is Baylor's opponent on Saturday, a team that Baylor beat by 25 points in the conference opener. Because looking at what they did over the weekend, I don't think this is the same Utah team. I don't. Because they took on arch rival BYU over the weekend and beat them in overtime. And the records aren't that different. And I think BYU has been like Baylor in that they've underachieved thus far. But I thought BYU was going to be a pretty solid I mean, a lot of people were picking them to be a dark horse in this conference. And I thought they were going to be a pretty good team again, just like they were last year, which, they stubbed some toes last year. I don't think they were legit contenders for the Big 12 title, but they were a pretty solid team. And by the time the tournament came around, they were a hot pick to go to the Sweet 16. Didn't work, but I was kind of buying into the BYU hype in this offseason, the new coach and Igor Denham. I could still say that looking at a game between BYU and Utah, that BYU should have the top 3 players on the floor. Like, Denham, Saunders, Traore, I would say, like, all those guys. I like Keita. I like what Keita can give to you. I think all those guys you could say are better than Utah's best guy. And yet, this was kind of a classic Big 12 game on Saturday for 2 teams that are new to the Big 12. BYU in year 2, Utah in year 1. This was kind of a knockdown, drag out Big 12 basketball game. And Ezra Ausar, I think it's Ausar is how you say it. He was all over the place. He was awesome for them. Our pal Caleb Lohner had 2 points in 9 minutes, by the way. And Miro Little had 0 points in 3 minutes, which I think Miro was starting in the conference opener. Tough sledding for our former Bears. But this was an impressive win for Utah over the weekend, which has seemed to find, like, Utah has found out how to play basketball. They beat TCU, which, again, I'm not more impressed by after the Baylor win. I'm just more down on, the Baylor loss to TCU. I'm just more down on Baylor. But they went into Fort Worth and they beat TCU. Utah did. And now they go home, big game against a team that's obviously going to be way up for it, and a team that's more talented than them. And they beat them as well. And they put the clamps on Denham. Denham doesn't hit double figures again. I think he had 9 points, two assists. Guy who set the freshman record for assists in a game for BYU earlier this year. 2 assists. Just did not have his fingerprints on the game at all. And Utah went out there and beat him. I know it's not at the Marriott Center, which is a really tough place to play, but that's a big-time victory for that team to show that, hey, we can win in this league. Because a lot of people a couple weeks ago were not thinking they could win in this league. I certainly didn't, because I wasn't that impressed by Baylor going into the conference schedule. And then they just took Utah to the woodshed when no one was watching, because we were all watching the Texas Bowl or getting ready for the Texas Bowl. And Baylor crushed them, just crushed them. And I thought this team does not belong in this conference in basketball. I think they should give up the sport. And I'm not saying they're going to be a tournament team, But these are a good couple wins on the bounce for Utah. And they're surprising some people with their current run. Same record as Baylor, by the way. Yeah, 11-6, and guess what? The same conference record as Baylor, 3-3. So you can't take Utah for granted. You absolutely cannot. And you've got them on the road this weekend. And if there's one thing that we've loved about Baylor basketball over the years, is they will use the altitude at any time. Remember Denver against Creighton? There was talks about the altitude, not getting up right to the altitude. Last year, BYU, scheduled loss. What did they do? They lost. Oh, but it's a great environment. Oh, but it's the altitude. Like, I can already hear it. I can already hear it coming. Utah's no basketball school, but they'll get up for this one. They'll have a decent crowd there. It's a team that's won a couple on the bounce. They're coming off a bad football season. They're a bad football team. And they're going to come in here and see that, Baylor's a wounded duck, whether they win or lose against Kansas State on Wednesday. And they're going to get up for this thing on a Saturday. And so Baylor's got to go out to Salt Lake and play Utah. And then Baylor's got to turn around and play BYU on the road on Tuesday. So probably going to stay out there. Again, I can already feel the built-in excuses. The atmosphere, the altitude, new teams to the Big 12, shorthanded. It's already flooding my memory here. They need to go and pick one up against Kansas State on Wednesday. That is an absolute must-win. And I look at these next two, and I don't know if I can call them must-wins, but I would say inside that Baylor locker room, like, if you guys want to prove us wrong and you want to prove that you are still nailed on tournament team that can beat good teams in this league, like, if you want us to respect you guys as a nailed on tournament team that can possibly even get to the Sweet 16, if that's the leap that you want to make, you've got to win the next three. Right? Am I wrong? Like, you've got to beat Kansas State. That's no doubter. Like, if you want to prove you're a decent team, you got to be better than them, who made a game of it with Kansas Saturday, when it didn't look like they were going to. Didn't look like they were going to score in the first half. You've got to win that game, and then you've got to win a couple on the road. Like, I'm sorry, you have to. You just lost to a mediocre team at home. If you want the respect from the outsiders, from the fans, from the rest of your league, you got to win 3 in a row, and at least 2. Because you should still be, you have more talent than Utah. Right now, I think you have more talent than BYU. You definitely have more talent than Kansas State. It's time to put it together and show it, because that's what Baylor's problem's been this year. But Utah looks like a basketball team again, for the first time in a long time. But Utah looks like a basketball team. So anyway, that's a test all of a sudden for Baylor. Let me know what you guys think about how that game should go. Drop it down in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe on the video. That helps out the channel a ton. It helps me bring more fresh Baylor content to you every day, twice a day, most of the time. We are the #1 destination for Baylor sports. Like, that's just a fact. We're the best Baylor sports show out there. Mainly thanks to you guys for making it such a great community. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and then find us wherever you find your podcast. In fact, if you're just listening, that's great. Love you guys just the same, maybe even more, because I get more money from the audio downloads, if we're being honest. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast, maybe across multiple platforms. It's going to help. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. We will see you tomorrow on Locked On Baylor.